A young mother woke up one morning and didn't feel very well at all. Her sinuses were plugged, her hearing was affected. She knew she was in for a rough day. She just wanted to go back to bed. With that, the telephone rang, and she thought, oh, I don't want to talk on the telephone to anybody. She picked up the phone and she heard this very familiar voice say, "Hi, honey, how are you?" And she said, "Oh, Mom, I'm so glad you called. I'm just feeling awful. I'm having a terrible day, and it's just started. I feel miserable. The washing machine just broke. I've got to get to the store and get some food because we're having guests for dinner. The house is a mess, and the baby is acting up. I can't even feed the baby." And she started to cry. The mother said, "Cheer up. Now, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'll be there in about a half hour. I'll stop on the way and pick up some food. I'll fix dinner for you and your guests. I'll clean the house. I'll feed the baby. Please, stop your crying. And oh, I'll call the repairman, and just before I leave the house, I'll call George and tell him that he needs to get home early today." And there was a little pause, and the girl said, "George? Who's George?" And the mother said, "Your husband." And she said, "My husband's Jim." And the woman said, "Oh, I've called the wrong number." And there was a pause, and the young mother said, "Does this mean you're not coming over?" But Jesus went over. Jesus went to Jairus' house. He followed through with the promise. I think that's what's unique about this particular gospel is that we have two miracles being performed in the same story. And at first glance, it appears as though these two incidents, the two women involved, the little girl and the woman hemorrhaging, really have very little in common. They're completely different people. They certainly don't even know each other. But I think there is a commonality, and there is a very good reason why they are linked in this story, not just that they happen to have occurred simultaneously. But I think the point here I want to make is, first of all, you notice the significance of the 12. It might have slipped by you because they're at different ends of the story. But the little girl is 12 years old. The woman hemorrhaging has been hemorrhaging for 12 years, which means this woman has been hemorrhaging the entire length of the little girl's life. And now the woman is suffering from too much blood, and the little girl is about to have no blood at all. But what I think the real commonality that I want to stress in the story is that both of the two people, now I'm going to be talking about Jairus, the official from the synagogue, along with the woman hemorrhaging, both of them had to separate themselves from characteristics that most of us have, and most of us have a great deal of separating ourselves from. And the three things I'm talking about are our ingrained or almost ingrained prejudices, our sense of pride, and our just sense of well-being and doing what we feel comfortable with. And here's what I mean by that. In the case of the Jewish official, and notice it just says a synagogue leader, other scripture passages call him the ruler of the synagogue. Now, the ruler of the synagogue was the administrator. He would have responsibility for everything that goes on in the synagogue. Now, he wouldn't do the services. That would be the role of the rabbi. But the synagogue official was significant. Now, imagine this synagogue official has left his synagogue where he spends most of his time, very devoted to Jewish practices and traditions, and he's gone to see Jesus. He's gone to see the man who's been exiled from the synagogue, who's no longer welcomed, and yet he goes to him. This is dispensing the prejudices that have to be natural to a leader in the Jewish faith at the time. The woman, she had to do the same. She had to separate herself from a prejudice that all women have in that time, because to be struck with this hemorrhaging problem was to be unclean. A woman going through something like this was not welcome at the synagogue. She was not welcomed really outside of her home. And certainly no man would want to be in her presence. She was unclean. So she had to separate herself from that prejudice and still go out. They had to do without their own dignity, too. They had to separate themselves from that. Notice in the official's case, he bows down to Jesus' feet. He literally goes down to his knees. A Jewish man, especially a synagogue official, would never do that. yet he did. The woman did the same. She prostrated herself to Jesus in asking for his help and his understanding. So they both did some things that are very difficult to do because their need was so great. And Jesus healed them. And why? Of course, because they showed such faith. And notice that in his healing process, touch was very much a part of it. Now, in the case of the woman, she touched him. In the case of the little girl, Jesus did the touching. But I want to emphasize touch. It's one of the senses that I'm not sure that we typically feel comfortable with much of the time. It's one of the senses that many of us, especially we men, tend to shy away from. How often do you see a man hug another man? Some of us do, but a lot of men feel very uncomfortable with that. Now, granted, there are certain taboos within our society that make it difficult for a man and woman who are just friends to hug. A woman might not feel comfortable being hugged by a man who's not her husband. Man might feel uncomfortable hugging another woman. There's issues here. With the swine flu epidemic, there's other issues. Certainly hugging a child has suddenly become a real problem in our society because of the abuse so many children have experienced. So I fully appreciate that this hugging or any other kind of touching has some repercussions in our society. And it's very unfortunate. Because as Jesus demonstrates so well, and I think we've experienced in our own lifetime, when a hug really helped, really made us feel good. Haven't you ever been feeling very squeamish about something? You're having difficulty, whatever it might be. You feel uncomfortable with a certain situation. Somebody comes up to you and gives you a hug and says it's going to be okay. There's kind of a relief coming in. In talking with people who are going through a real trauma in their life, let's say they've lost a spouse, there's nothing better for them, they've often said, than somebody coming up, putting their arms around them and saying, I understand how difficult this must be for you. I wish I could take away your pain, and giving them a hug. There's something very therapeutic involved here, psychologically very powerful. Jesus was very much aware of this. And I think that's why the touching was so important to him. So, while certainly listening to someone who's having difficulty is very important, giving them an opportunity to express the pain they're experiencing, most people who've lost a loved one will say the pain is incredible. But what adds to it is the sense of loneliness I feel. And what really hurts is when my close friends seem to want to distance themselves from me because they don't feel comfortable. They ought to guess how I feel. How many people do we know who stay away from wakes, stay away from hospitals? I just don't feel comfortable going there. I don't enjoy it. Well, you don't have to enjoy it. You got to do it. Are you a friend or not? Are we friends or not? Yeah, it's one of the things in life we should do because it's good to do. So, recognizing that it creates certain problems, certain discomfort, if we can do something that will help someone alleviate the pain that they're experiencing, is there anything more Christ-like that we could do?